Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm George Hidalgo, Club President. Thanks for joining us today. Unfortunately, I began our meeting with the sad news of the death of a longtime member, Phil Levy, who passed away on February 11th at the age of 78. So Phil was owner of Phil Levy Fine Furniture and Interior Design. He is one of the founding members of Madison South Rotary and joined our club in 1991. Phil's late father, Irving, was also a member of our club, and his brother Marv is a member of our club. Now, their family established a scholarship fund within our Madison Rotary Foundation in 2004. Phil was pretty active. He served on our club board of directors, and he chaired our culinary arts fellowship group for many years. Phil had 5 Paul Harris Fellows. Now, our club has made a $100 gift in Phil's name to establish a memorial fund in his honor. Members wishing to make a gift to this fund may send their contribution to the Rotary office. So we extend our sympathy to Phil's brothers, Jeff and Marv. So let's pause for a moment of silence in memory of Phil Levy. Tough losing someone like him. So my opening message today is about our annual Rotary Ethics Symposium. Now, even though the pandemic postponed the event this year, it will be back stronger than ever next year. So we'll host over 200 Dane County High School juniors who will examine the importance of ethics and take part in decision-making exercises to prompt debate and introspection. Now, these students learn how to better deal with daily ethical dilemmas. And we have over 50 members of our club who volunteer throughout the day as the students engage in discussions. So it's everyone I've talked to, I haven't had a chance to participate here, but everybody I've talked to says it's a fantastic experience. It's one of the most outstanding service programs that we support to make our community a better place to live. And I hope you'll consider getting involved in next year's Rotary Ethics Symposium. So today, let's recite our 4-way test. Now remember, I've added fun to the 4-way test this year. Of the things we think, say, or do. 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And don't forget the 5th item, which I've added this year as our banner shows, will it be fun for all concerned? So I hope we have a little fun each week as we connect, grow, and serve. Virtually for now, but we know the end is in sight, and we'll be able to meet in person soon, and definitely look forward to that. Opening music. Jeff and Angela Bartell will play and sing our patriotic song, Your Grand Old Flag, followed by a feature song performed by Jeff Bartell and Dick Lovell. Take it away.
Where there's never a boast and say, only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you? Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things were meant to be. Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you.
So Alex Antoniewicz chairs our UW-Madison Rotary Advisory Committee, and he's going to give us an update on the Rotary group activities for the semester.
Hello, my fellow Rotarians. I hope that the first 6 weeks of the new year have been treating you well. My name is Alex Vitani. I am chair of the Rotary Committee for our club, where I support the UW Rotary Club's efforts on campus. First and foremost, I want to thank the members of our committee. The Rotarians have spoken at past and will be speaking at future events, future meetings, and the members of our club who have been so generous with their time in connecting with Rotary students who share similar ambitions. You've really done a great job, and I want to thank you, and the Rotary Club thanks you for being so supportive of their work on campus. Like our club, the UW Rotary Club looks for ways to connect, grow, and serve both within Madison, but as well as the broader Rotary communities. With that in mind, I would like to introduce UW Rotary member Ashley Krasowski to share an upcoming Rotary event that members of our club are also invited to attend. Ashley, can you share a little bit more about this event?
Of course. Hello, my name is Ashley Krasowski. I am a junior at UW-Madison. I'm studying on the pre-medical track and also getting a certificate in business. And I am on Rotaract. I'm the chair of member outreach. So on behalf of the other executive board members, we invite all of you to a Rotarian social on March 10th from 7 to 8 p.m. via Zoom. Mr. Dave Anderson, who is president of the Wausau Early Bird Rotary Club and a district governor nominee, is going to be speaking to us about his career accomplishments and how his group has remained active and engaged throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is our hope that you will join us and we can bridge that connection between different Rotary clubs in Wisconsin.
Thanks, Ashley. That sounds like a great event. Really unique topic, and I think something that our club will be interested in, especially as we've had to adapt to the virtual format here as well. I know we all miss seeing each other, so I'll be curious to learn from Dave. But thank you for putting that on and for inviting our club. So, fellow Rotarians, if you're looking for an easy way to share your time and talents, maybe perhaps your organization's looking to fill a future employee or intern pipeline. I know Ashley and her cohort at the Rotary Club are always looking for career opportunities. Or frankly, if you just want to have a little more fun on a light video call that maybe isn't as bland as some of the Zoom calls you've been having, please consider logging in on the 10th and joining us and the Rotary Club for this event. If you're interested in attending, contact me directly or through the Rotary office. We can get you more details. Thanks, and hope to see you then.
So I mentioned a few weeks ago that our current Vice President, Mark Moody, resigned as an officer of our club since he will move into Florida later this year. He's already there right now, but in terms of getting his house and everything else, will be later in the year. Our club board held a meeting last week to address the vice president vacancy, and I'm pleased to announce that Teresa Holmes has been named our club's vice president for the remainder of this year, and she automatically becomes president on July 1st. Now, Teresa joined our Rotary Club in 2016 and owns Exponential Endeavors. Now, in December, she was elected our club's vice president for the next Rotary year, so she's moving up her role a year. So let's give her a round of applause. So with Teresa moving up a year in the schedule, our club board also needed to elect a new vice president for next year. And I'm pleased to announce that Paul Hoffman has been elected as our club's vice president for the 2021-2022 year, and he will automatically become president the following year. So Paul Hoffman is president and CEO of Monona Bank, and he has been a member of our club since 2012. So with that, let's give Paul a round of applause. So thanks to Teresa and to Paul for their willingness to lead our club. And we look forward to their upcoming service to all of us and as the Madison Rotary Club continues to excel. Now, I just announced that Teresa has been named vice president for the remainder of this Rotary year. So you figure it's February 17th, which means she's now put in the VP slot and has 4.5 months to do everything that normally takes a year. So she's here to make an announcement about her planning for the next Rotary year. Teresa?
Thank you, President George. Good afternoon, Rotarians. I can't see you from where I'm standing, but I know you see me. So as George said, I have about 4.5 months to do a lot of work that normally happens in the VP year. So committees are what drive the important work of our club. And as you know, they often bring us together and then send us out into our community. So each year, the incoming president appoints chairs to each of the committees. So this year, I am working with a 12-month planning calendar to get everything done in just 4.5 months. So I'm here to seek your input. I'm filling chairmanships for my year as president, and as I work on those plans, I welcome input from each of you as members. I'm asking you to please send an email to the Rotary office by the end of the day on February 25th if you are interested in chairing any of the committees next year. If you have a specific committee, please let that be known in the information that you send in your email as well. Remember, serving as a committee chair in our club can lead to future leadership positions. Look at what happened to me. I'll be working to fill those slots within the next month. And as George mentioned, 4.5 months in what normally takes or is done in a 12-month cycle. So I'm looking forward to your input, and I am interested in what you have to say. So this upcoming Rotary year will be a great year of service together. So send your feedback, your comments, and your input regarding chairs to the office no later than Thursday, February 25th. Thank you.
So at this time each year, we announce names of nominees for Madison Rotary Foundation Board of Trustees beginning July 1st. We have Joe Luenas, Oscar Morales, and Jeff Tews. Now, the election of new trustees will take place at the annual meeting of the Madison Rotary Foundation at our Rotary meeting on Wednesday, March 10th. As prescribed by the foundation bylaws, any 10 members of the Madison Rotary Club may submit in writing, signed by said 10 members, any additional name or names to the foundation secretary, Pat Jenkins, and sent to our Rotary office for inclusion on the ballot. All names submitted prior to March 1st shall be included in the ballot. So we have birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor, wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. We also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounding up to $100 for our club Synergy Scholarship Fund. February 14th, Carl Gulbranson. February 14th, Dale Henricks. February 17th, Tony Arneson. February 18th, past President Davey Winowski, who shares this message. I'm missing all of my Rotary friends, but feel better knowing that we are still doing good things together, apart. February 18th, Ann Newer Morrison. February 20th, Grace Chosey. So thanks to our members for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. Please join me in wishing them a happy birthday. Elaine Mishler will play Happy Birthday on the piano. So we have a couple of members in the news we'd like to highlight. Christian Overland was quoted in an article about Jerry Frauschi's $10 million donation to the new downtown Wisconsin History Museum. That's Wisconsin State Journal on 2/15. And we heard from Alex Antoniewicz earlier in the agenda about our Rotary Club. And I'd like to congratulate Alex and his wife Lauren on the birth of their first child, Tate Alexander Vitanye, who was born on February 9th. So congratulations, Alex and Lauren. So on to our program. Now, we held our monthly board meeting on February 1st on Zoom. And I encourage members to review our board minutes that we post in the member login tab of our club's website. Now, we want members to see our current board members in person, so we always ask one board member to introduce a speaker each month. This month, Mary O'Brien will make the introduction. Now, Mary joined our Rotary Club in 2015. She is a former member of 2 Rotary Clubs in Illinois, so let's not hold that against her. St. Charles, where she became the first female club president in 1990, and the Geneva Rotary Club, where she was selected president in 2004. So Mary is retired from the Fox Valley Orthopedic Clinic. She is in her first of a 2-year term on our board of directors, and Mary will now introduce our speaker. Mary?
Thank you, President George. Our speaker today is Ellen Antoniewicz, who has titled her speech, "The Women's Hour Has Struck." Ellen earned her master's degree at UW-Madison, focusing on nonprofit management. Her final master's project was creating a walking tour highlighting stories of influential women in our state's history. She has also helped to create virtual school programs to offer to Wisconsin elementary schools, including one that focuses on women's suffrage. Ellen will lead us on a march through suffrage history. She will explore the stories of leaders, tactics, losses, and victories as women work for the right to vote, and we will see how Wisconsin fits in with the larger story of enfranchisement. We look forward to her presentation, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thank you for speaking to us. I also want to mention that there will be a live Q&A with our speaker immediately following today's presentation. You can find the link to Zoom in this morning's email or in the YouTube chat. Let's welcome Ellen to our virtual podium.
Hello, and thank you for joining me for The Woman's Hour Has Struck. I want to thank the Madison Rotary Club for inviting me to present this talk to you today. My name is Ellen Antoniewicz, and I am one of the educators at the Wisconsin Historical Museum on Madison's Capitol Square. I am excited to share with you today the story of women gaining the right to vote. This is a story that was incredibly personal for many of the people who helped along the way. As experiences showed, the ballot was incredibly important. It created a platform that allowed your voice to be heard. So today, we will explore the long and varied history of women's right to vote and the efforts of generations of women and men to extend this right to more people and inspire eligible voters to cast a ballot while listening to a number of quotes by and about these important individuals. In Madison, we are on what was historically Ho-Chunk land. So it makes sense to start Wisconsin women's political history and the right to vote with the first individual woman documented in the historical record. Our sources are limited on her, but what we do know largely comes from the written account of explorer Jonathan Carver and oral tradition. Ho-Po-Ka, or Glory of the Morning, was the daughter of a powerful Ho-Chunk chief. Around 1727, she was selected as his successor to lead the largest Ho-Chunk village, which was east of Lake Winnebago near modern-day Neenah. Under Ho-Po-Ka's leadership, the Ho-Chunk sided with the French against the Meskwaki in several battles during the Fox War. Ho-Po-Ka stayed on her tribal land and led her people for about 40 years. Carver recorded of Ho-Po-Ka, "The queen sat in the council, but only asked a few questions or gave some trifling directions in matters relative to the state. For women are never allowed to sit in their councils, except they happen to be invested with the supreme authority. She was a very ancient woman, small in stature and not much distinguished by her dress from several young women that attended her. I saluted her, which I frequently did to acquire her favor. On these occasions, the good old lady endeavored to assume a juvenile gaiety, and by her smiles showed she was equally pleased with the attention I paid her." Both of Ho-Po-Ka's sons succeeded her as chief during the turbulent times of the Ho-Chunk's forced relocation from Wisconsin by the U.S. government. Ho-Po-Ka's descendants, known as the Decoras, became one of the most prominent Ho-Chunk families and served as diplomats in treaty agreements with the U.S. Just a few years later, perhaps when Ho-Po-Ka was preparing her sons to lead the Ho-Chunk people, American colonists were discussing the leadership of the newly formed United States of America. In a letter dated March 31st, 1776, Abigail Adams urged her husband, who would soon be the second president of the United States, "I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." Now, as we all know, the original body did not remember the ladies, nor did they remember the indigenous Americans, the enslaved peoples, or anyone else who was not a white male property owner. But Abigail Adams was absolutely right. The rebellion that she foresaw built slowly, but it steadily gained force. In 1848, which was the same year that Wisconsin became a state and chose not to include women's suffrage in its state constitution, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the Seneca Falls Convention, and the fight for women's suffrage had become a coherent political movement. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. We have all heard Thomas Jefferson's original words in the Declaration of Independence. The women of Seneca Falls added 2 key words in their Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, "and women." This marked the beginning of a chapter that would not close until 1920. I want to take a moment to reflect on that. 72 years passed between the Seneca Falls Convention and the 19th Amendment. So the Wisconsin woman in the article that I have pictured here, she attended the Seneca Falls Convention when she was 12 years old, and she was able to first cast a vote at the age of 84. Many of the women who attended Seneca Falls did not live long enough to cast their own ballots, but they still fought, and because they kept fighting, the next generation gained the right to vote that the founders of the suffrage movement never got to experience themselves. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go back to 1848 and the Declaration of Sentiments. So some of the sentiments that they wrote included, he has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns, having deprived her of the first right as a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation. He has oppressed her on all sides. What does a woman do in these circumstances when things are so stacked against her? Well, people are resilient, and we fight, and in ebbs and flows, active moments and quiet ones. For the next 72 years, women in Wisconsin, the nation, and the world fought for these rights. They were often divided by race, class, and political view, but united in the belief that suffrage was a fundamental right. The movement was divided by race pretty early on. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were active abolitionists. In fact, that's how they met one another. But there's a difference between ending slavery and believing in political equality. When the 15th Amendment passed in 1870, which was enfranchising Black men, not all suffragists were happy about that news. Susan B. Anthony actually used this as a talking point. She spoke about how white women deserved the vote more than Black men did because they were more educated. She actually visited Janesville to speak something along those lines. It's a dark side of our history that different suffrage and civil rights movements have been pitted against each other, as if gaining rights for one group somehow means another group's rights have less value. But Black women and men were instrumental to the movement from the very beginning. The historical evidence of African American suffrage activism in Wisconsin is unfortunately minimal, but we have more evidence of Black suffrage activism and leadership across the Midwest. Sojourner Truth, who settled in Michigan after escaping slavery, delivered her most famous speech at a women's rights convention in Ohio 3 years after Seneca Falls. Many of you probably know this speech, Ain't I a Woman, which is a very rousing speech, but the well-known version was actually written 12 years later by a white journalist. Many historians now think that Truth never even used that phrase, Ain't I a Woman. This speaks to the challenges of historical evidence, but also the way that speeches in the suffrage movement could take on a life of their own as they were adapted to different contexts. We don't have the speech in Truth's own hand because she was not able to write. She spoke extemporaneously, but here are some quotations from the earliest recorded versions. I am a woman's rights. I have as much muscle as any man, and I can do as much work as any man. I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed, and can any man do more than that? I have heard much about the sexes being equal. I can carry as much as any man and can eat as much too if I can get it. The poor men seem to be all in confusion and don't know what to do. Why, children, if you have woman's rights, give it to her and you will feel better. You will have your own rights and they won't be so much in trouble. I can't read, but I can hear. I have heard the Bible and have learned that Eve caused man to sin. Well, if woman upset the world, do give her a chance to set it right side up again. Sojourner Truth was part of the first generation of women's suffrage activists. She recast the debate in terms of basic human dignity and decency. Her speech made it clear that women's rights weren't just for literate white women, but for all women. In later decades, Black women's clubs and suffrage organizations continued to fight for women's suffrage, but were often asked to march in a separate section in parades, and they were not always welcomed at the rallies. Outside of conventions and speeches, the press was essential to spreading the word about the suffrage movement. As I mentioned before, it's only through later newspapers that we have a record of Sojourner Truth's speech. Alice Stone Blackwell, on the left here, printed one of the best-known women's papers, the Woman's Journal. And Wisconsin had its own share of suffrage writers. In Fort Atkinson, Emma Brown published the Wisconsin Chief, which was the longest-running suffrage journal in the country from 1857 to 1889. Brown also covered temperance, factory labor, prison conditions, and more. As Brown's career demonstrates, suffragists generally were not single-issue activists. On the contrary, they cared deeply about all kinds of social and political issues, which was why they fought so hard for the right to vote on them. Most famously, a large portion of suffragists were also active in the temperance movement, but this was not universal. The one thing that really united suffragists was their commitment to civic engagement, which was definitely true of Theodora Yeomans. one of Wisconsin's first women journalists. She wrote for the Waukesha Daily Freeman for many years. She was also very active in local organizations and served on statewide committees, organizing the Wisconsin Semi-Centennial Celebration and the 1993 World's Fair delegation. Her passion for public service led her to the suffrage movement. For all her hard work on behalf of Wisconsin, her power was still limited. Throughout the 1800s, suffrage battles were fought at state and local levels. In some cases, women got partial suffrage. That is, they were allowed to vote only on issues that were deemed relevant to them. This began in Kentucky in 1838, where women got the right to vote in school board elections because as mothers, that would affect their children. We actually got a similar school suffrage law in Wisconsin in 1885, but because the law did not provide for separate ballots with only school board issues listed, in practice, women were not actually able to vote for another 15 years. And that was a common story. States tried to get partial suffrage around issues like school, liquor, and anything related to domestic life. These suffrage laws would be tested in court. Some stood and some failed. The first state to grant full suffrage to women was Colorado in 1893, and other states followed before the passage of the 19th Amendment. But as we have seen time and again, the legal right to vote, whether through full or partial suffrage, does not always guarantee equal access to the polls. Which brings us to a new generation of suffrage advocates. As the 20th century arrived, this new generation of women reinvigorated the suffrage movement. These activists had not experienced the decades of slow change and setbacks, and they were not about to let that movement get stalled any longer. This generation of activists took to the streets, gaining attention through highly visible and public actions. Alice Paul led the National Women's Party in picketing the White House and went on hunger strikes from prison. In Wisconsin, too, the new generation adopted radical new tactics. There were deep internal divisions within the movement over the best way to achieve women's suffrage. In 1911, Ada James and others broke away from the existing Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association to form the Political Equality League. Their strategy focused on directly canvassing the public. They used the latest, flashiest technology, automobiles, to tour the state, carrying enormous banners and delivering speeches right from the cars in public spaces. The 1912 referendum was the first chance that women had to potentially vote in Wisconsin elections. During this time, Senator David James introduced this bill to pass women's suffrage at the state level. David James was the husband of suffrage advocate Laura James and father of suffrage activist Ada James. In 1912, a bill was passed by 2 consecutive legislative sessions and signed by Governor Francis McGovern. Now it fell to the state's male voters to vote in a referendum, either for or against women's suffrage. Ada James and the newly formed Political Equality League threw themselves behind the effort to gain support for the referendum. But there was a strong anti-suffrage contingent in Wisconsin as well. The anti-suffrage movement in Wisconsin used economic as well as moral justifications. As you all know, the brewing industry, it's pretty big here in Wisconsin. Many, though not all suffragists, were also active in the temperance movement, and anti-suffrage literature used the threat of temperance to scare male voters. Brewers saw women's suffrage as a serious threat to their livelihood and rallied Wisconsin's powerful German-American voting bloc against the suffrage referendum. This was a major factor in the failure of that referendum, which did fail by about 91,000 votes. Wisconsin women had lost yet another battle for the vote, and after this failure, the Political Equality League merged with the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association, and they decided together to focus more on the national effort. Wisconsin was not the only state to try and fail to gain women's suffrage. This map shows which states had full, partial, or no women's suffrage in 1912. This was not the end of the fight, however. During this period, the suffrage movement shifted focus from state-by-state suffrage laws to creating a federal amendment so that every woman in the U.S. would finally gain the right to vote. Wisconsin suffragists organized at local and state levels to take part in the national suffrage movement. Notably, Wisconsin suffragists led by Theodora Yeomans participated in a march on the Republican National Convention held in Chicago in 1916. They wore the golden tunics that have become an icon of Wisconsin's women's suffrage movement. Women purchased these tunics along with a hat and a round-trip ticket to Chicago so that they could all travel en masse and show up in matching uniforms to support women's suffrage. And when they arrived, they joined groups from across the nation that had come to Chicago that day. The major turning point for the national suffrage movement was the US entry into World War I in 1917. Suffragists were very divided on this issue. A large contingent were pacifists who did not support the war. Others, whether through genuine support of the war effort or pure pragmatism, realized they could gain sympathy from President Wilson if they sided with him on this war issue. It paved the way for that 19th Amendment. Between January 1918 and June 1919, the House and Senate voted on the federal amendment 5 times. Each vote was extremely close, and Southern Democrats continued to oppose giving women the vote. Suffragists pressured President Wilson to call a special session of Congress, and he agreed to schedule one for May 19, 1919. On May 21st, the amendment passed the House 304 to 89, which was 42 votes more than it needed. On June 4th, 1919, it was brought before the Senate, and after Southern Democrats abandoned their filibuster, 37 Republican senators joined 19 Democrats to pass that amendment. As soon as news arrived that the amendment had passed, Senator David James got on a train to Washington, D.C. to hand-deliver the documents that made Wisconsin the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment. He later described this race to be first. He said, "We packed into the taxi and arrived in no time at the office of the Secretary of State, where my papers were safely filed, and I received a signed statement that Wisconsin was first. I returned to the Secretary of State just in time for the entrance of the messenger from Illinois. He walked up and slapped his papers down on the table. I brought papers to show Illinois was first," he said, and was interrupted by our peals of laughter. Which, this is a bit of a contested fact. If you look on Wikipedia, you will see that they actually list Illinois as the first ones to ratify the 19th Amendment, but we have that paper in our collections that says that we are the official first ones to ratify. On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was officially enacted. However, the fight was still not over for all women. At this time, American Indians were not classified as U.S. citizens unless they formally renounced all tribal affiliations. Although the 1848 Wisconsin Constitution did stipulate American Indian citizens recognized by the federal government could vote, many Native Americans stood to lose more than they gained by becoming U.S. citizens. For this reason, most American Indians did not gain the right to vote through the 15th or the 19th Amendments. This changed with the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which declared that all people born within the territorial limits of the United States were citizens. For the first time, all American Indian men and women were eligible to vote in U.S. elections. This law was enacted in part in recognition of the many American Indian volunteers who served in the U.S. military during World War I. The 1924 Act guaranteed that American Indians could vote while maintaining their sovereign identities. However, even after 1924, some Native people were kept from the polls through state action and laws that added additional hurdles to the polls, like taxes and tests. Similar laws affected non-white voters throughout the country. In 1964, civil rights activists brought renewed attention to the issue of voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 banned any voting law that discriminated against racial or language minorities. It also guaranteed against gender discrimination at the polls, and, by the way, that part of the law was largely thanks to the work of Alice Paul, who was then in her 80s and was still fighting for women's voting rights. The law had an immediate impact. By the end of 1965, 250,000 new Black voters had registered. Subsequent legislation reaffirmed and strengthened voting protections. In 1971, the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. The impetus was that men who were 18 were being drafted to serve in Vietnam, but still couldn't vote on issues that would impact their futures. This was the quickest ratification of any amendment in U.S. history. The 26th Amendment was passed by Congress on March 23, 1971, and ratified on July 1st. The justification was similar to enfranchising women and American Indians after their service in World War I, and earlier enfranchising Black men after their service in the Civil War. The speed of this ratification shows that Americans had come to widely believe that those who had served their country should also have a voice in politics. While the 19th Amendment was imperfect and did not provide an equitable path to the polls for all women, it was a watershed moment. Future movements would be built upon this, and women have voted in higher numbers than men in every election since 1964. Yet the fight for voting rights continues. Today, questions surrounding citizenship, identification, gerrymandering, and other issues are being discussed across the nation. Activists and lawmakers still stand on the shoulders of those who came before them to ensure that all Americans have equal access to the polls. So remember, the right to vote is not something that we should take for granted. Generations of Americans from all walks of life have fought for access to those polls. Stand on their shoulders and let your voices be heard. Thank you so much for joining me for today's presentation, and I look forward to hearing your questions and being able to talk with you all on February 17th.
Okay, thank you for that enlightening presentation. So for those interested, we will now move to the live Q&A session via Zoom. So you can see the link in the chat or find the link in this morning's email from the Rotary office. Now, I also want to remind members that we seek feedback on our programs each week. And there is a link in the chat to a very brief survey about today's program. So it's not like other organizations that tell you it's a brief survey and give you 30 questions. This is really short. We also include a link to the speaker survey in each Friday morning email. So either way, we would love to have your feedback. We can improve based on the feedback you provide us. So with that, thank you to everyone who attended today's meeting. We are adjourned.